Well, hello everyone. I'm Deborah Weiss. I direct the Workforce Science Project at Northwestern Center on Law, Business, and Economics. We are thrilled to have you here today at the first 2025 Navigating People Analytics Careers, where we focus on organizations and how they define the evolving role of people analytics. We would love you to engage fully. As Richard said, please feel free to drop in your location and your LinkedIn profiles. Also, please drop any questions in the chat as we go along, and Richard will make sure to get to them at some point during the conversation. Our moderator, Richard, probably needs no introduction. He's One Model's Vice President of People Analytics Strategy, key figure in the people analytics space. I suspect you all know him. He's done a great service keeping us all updated on people analytics openings. I put that in the chat in the beginning, and we are fortunate to have a wonderful guest who I am going to let Richard introduce.
Thank you so much, Deb. And a quick shout out to, I know Deb is too humble to say it, but TALREOS is coming up. And so if folk are interested, I want to make sure we're giving shout outs to kind of the great work that Deb has done for the Northwestern Science Project and the great events on the horizon. So maybe we can circle back to that at the end. But I know that's coming up in just a few months here. So we'll come back to that. But everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I have been really looking forward to this one. Emma is a longtime friend in the space, someone I have a ton of respect for. And she's been making moves and hiring people and building things. And I really can't wait to find out a little bit more about what she's been up to. So this is one that I'm personally excited for as much as I'm excited to get her insights out to all of you. So without further ado, I would love to kind of kick things off. And Emma, thank you for joining us. Emma is the head of People Insights at a little company called Atlassian, which I think everybody on the call here should know, or if they do not know, which has done some just tremendous work in the people space too. So I'm hoping we can poke into that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But Emma, to kick us off here, could you talk us a little bit about your journey? How did you end up in people analytics?
Yeah, so I fell into it by accident, and I never left. So I grew up in Brisbane, Australia. I got my undergraduate degree in computer science, and I was sure that I had no employable skills leaving that degree. And then I happened to get a job for this very small Brisbane-based company called Inform. And it's one of those, like, if you know, you know. So if you know, you know, Inform. But if you don't happen to know, it was probably one of the first workforce analytics and planning kind of software as a service companies that existed. At the time that I joined, they had a partnership with Corporate Executive Board and CLC Metrics specifically. I joined as a data engineer. So we were taking data out of, I mean, this is now One Model's bread and butter, but we were taking data out of all of the HR systems that didn't talk to each other at various Fortune 500 companies. They would send us a huge raw extract out of their systems. We had a proprietary ETL process. We had our beautiful metrics catalog. And so that's sort of, I just fell into the space. That company ended up getting bought by SuccessFactors, which ended up getting bought by SAP. That was how I moved to the States for the first time. I then joined Mercer and was fortunate enough to work with their workforce sciences practice. I was with them for about 6.5 years, and I did a variety of things. But all of which, sort of touched the people space in some capacity. And then I moved back to Australia. I bought a house. I got married. I had a kid. And then Facebook asked if I wanted a job. And I was like, absolutely, I do. And they were like, great, you have to move back to San Francisco. And so I was with Facebook, then Meta for about 7.5 years. I think, keeping everyone honest, I think my bread and butter, what I was most known for, was really supporting recruiting through that time. They were on an incredible trajectory. We went from about 17,000 employees when I joined, all the way up to about 85,000 over a 5.5 year period, and then obviously back down again. And then in September of last year, I joined Atlassian. So along the way, I picked up a master's in human resource management. But I essentially joined people analytics as a 20-year-old and have not found a reason to leave yet.
It's fantastic. Emma, thank you so much for sharing. And if you don't mind, I want to dive way back to the beginning where you said you joined as a data engineer. I didn't know that about you, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that because it's something that I found fascinating in people analytics is we see a lot of people come from consulting or research or maybe data science backgrounds, maybe data analysts. There's not as many people that have that foundation in data engineering. Could you talk about how that shaped some of your perspectives in the space?
Yeah, I I don't think I can separate that background from how I think about solving problems. So, um, uh, in fact, my wife likes to make fun of the fact that I still like basically think about the world in terms of ERDs. Like I'm just such a systems thinker, that I'm just constantly rewiring my brain into a series of, sort of uh, fact tables and dimensional tables and how all those things relate together. So I think it's really approached the way that I like to solve problems. I like to make sure that I have a deep, deep understanding of what is the outcome we're trying to achieve, who is this problem sort of impacting, what would the value be in solving it, using very empirical evidence to sort of decide what the right solution is, and then taking a very methodical approach to sort of uh, the structuring of, KPI trees and the what your goal is, and having a very robust data foundation and the value of, building out a full metrics catalog. I think it shapes a lot. I think that I'm a systems thinker through and through because of that foundation.
It's fantastic. I really appreciate that. And it's a good share for data engineers that are out there looking for kind of career paths or thinking about how they fit in within the space, that there are career paths there for data engineering. And it's something I've encouraged whenever I find those people that are fascinated by data engineering, it's like, okay, you got to stay close because we need you
Yeah,
over here.
yeah,
So that's great
absolutely.
to hear. So I'd also love to touch back on Inform a little bit because if anyone has known me for any period of time, they know that I'm obsessed with Inform. I think it's a fascinating piece of history within the people analytics space, and it's one that doesn't get enough attention for the work that team did to really like launch this field and launch this space. Could you talk a little about like what Inform was doing back then? And because I know there's still some things too, like a little bit of that like fall of Rome, like there were some things that Inform was doing that we still quite haven't gotten back to as a field
Yeah.
as well. And it'd be great to just hear you talk a little bit about what Inform was.
Yeah, so Inform was about, I mean, I think by the time it got sold, it was about a 150-person company. We had offices in Brisbane, Washington, D.C., and London. So we served a global customer base. And we were largely a technology firm. We took, as I mentioned, we took people's data. It was old, it was a long time ago. So we built things like OLAP cubes to put the data into. And then there was a web app that you could interact with your data in a very structured sort of these are your metrics, you can slice them by your dimensions. It was the foundation of what a lot of uh, people analytics technology companies are now providing today. Um, it, it's hard to sort of tether like being growing up in Australia sort of made me who I am. And I would say like Inform is like similarly influential in I didn't know any different. I came in, I learned that you could scale these concepts that we have in people analytics where, you start with your measure definition and you bring your data sources together and then you use that to solve real life problems that companies are facing in order to bring value to people. And there's also a huge amount of value in democratizing that data across the workforce, and particularly to non-technical, sort of people across the organization. That there's a real benefit in having people have access to people data to make everyday decisions and not just sort of these big strategic bets. And so um, I have Inform colored glasses on too, Richard. Like it's hard for me to disassociate the way that I sort of, quote unquote, grew up in the workforce from that foundational beginning.
Well, thank you for indulging me. It's one that I'm fascinated with the history of a couple companies in the space. I was thinking, as you were mentioning, kind of like HiQ Labs kind of fits that positioning too. And like I
Yeah.
saw our good friend Ben Tish got a shout out in the comments. And thinking about a couple people that have come out of those different backgrounds and histories and kind of how this HR tech field has kind of shaped this. I find it endlessly fascinating. I hope some of the people listening do too. So thank you, Emma, for letting me dive in there.
Yeah,
But
of
let's bring
course.
you all the way back to current day. So Atlassian, famously remote first, doing some really
Mhm.
tremendous work in that space. Could you talk about how that shaped your perspective on building and leading a people analytics team within this area? Just from that foundation of being remote first.
Yeah, I mean, I think Atlassian at its core believes that it's not about where you do the work, it's about how the work gets done. And that's a principle that I am very much believe in my core as well. I know there's research that exists that suggests that we should go back to the office and more power to it. The companies that want to put those, return to office policies in place, but I will gladly take the advantage of being able to sort of hire and retain people remotely as a result of those policies. It means I can get my hands on the best talent. It means that we are not trying to uh, use data to shape an executive's sort of mandate, which I'm very grateful for. Um, and it is playing out in the data that we have internally as well, that it works. Um, Team effectiveness and team anywhere are two of the highest strengths that we have in our employment survey. So um, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, no, and I'll echo that. Just I've seen as companies go back, great talent has to kind of leave those companies behind within the people analytics space, just kind of tracking and
Yeah,
understanding the labor market. And I have seen you scoop up some really phenomenal people recently.
I
So
have.
congrats to you on that. And just the open roles when they are remote, I think are just at such a premium right now for the talent in the market that I laud you guys for continuing to do that. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about people analytics at Atlassian. I know you're relatively new still. Your team is still building out, but could you talk about some key priorities that you have in mind as you're growing the people analytics team?
Yeah. I am still very new in my tenure, and so there's sort of three big priorities that I have top of mind for me right now. And these are probably more focused on the people analytics team versus the work that that people analytics team is going to do. I'm happy to touch on that a little later as well. Um, but for me, I think if you have ever met me personally, you know that inside I am Hermione Granger, or Kate Weiler from The Diplomat. Like all I want is to reach a place with people where when I say that they should do something, they at least consider it. That's what sort of sets me on fire in my professional life. And so for me to do that, I really rely on relationships and influence. And I think it's really important that my team build the same. So um, that's number one is where are we building those relationships internal to the organization and external to the organization to have that influence and credibility. Um, Number two, if you know me, you probably know I have a huge bias for action, uh, outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. Um, it's to a fault. That's what I care about. And so really framing the work that we're doing around the outcomes that we're trying to achieve and the value aligned to those outcomes is very, very top of mind for me. And then third, this is my inform slash data engineering bias, but having that really robust foundation of a data and measurement machine is also sort of top of mind for me. I think those are the things that you do that are sort of crawling that allow you to run later on.
I think that's fantastic. And just to reiterate, that sort of idea of relationships and influence, bias for action, framing the work around outcomes, and a robust data foundation. What I find fascinating is that so someone who's been in the space for a while now, who's built up a great career in the space, who's kind of seen some trials and tribulations. When I frame this question up to people that are brand new, what are your priorities? They say, well, like it's an attrition study, it's a manager effectiveness, and it's a sentiment analysis, or these different analysis, and kind of that perspective compared to this, like it's a very non-people analytics answer that it doesn't address like that, like the stuff we do, but it's so important to actually thriving in this space to get these pieces done that you pulled out. So I really appreciate that. Could you talk a little about how maybe that's changed over time as you've had your career kind of grow and develop? Because I think it's a really important point to zoom in on.
Yeah, so I think I started my career as a third party consultant. So at both Inform and then at Mercer, I was really influencing other companies to take action, and I was advising and guiding and yes, doing a lot of data engineering work, but it really felt like I was seeing the best of what scale looked like. And then one of the reasons that I wanted to go to Facebook is that I wanted to sort of become a practitioner and do the work. And I think because I did it in that order, I do think I have a little bit of a different perspective where I'm like, what are the things that are important, irrespective of the work topic that is keeping me up at night right now? And so for me, it's those three things. Like if I have those three things, I feel like I can be successful in my job, whether the topic is AI adoption and how it's going to change, the workforce in the next 5 years, or whether it's we have a retention problem and we need to figure out what is going to sort of move the needle on that specific issue.
I think that's super helpful. And so we are 20 minutes in. At the 45 mark, we'll actually stop the recording. We will kick out all of your recording bots, and we will go
Okay.
off the record for Q&A. But throughout,
Sure.
if people want to put things in the comments or Q&A, I am monitoring those. I'll try to weave in questions where I can, or give shout outs to people where I can too. So please keep the Q&A coming, keep the chat coming, and start thinking about your questions for Emma in that once we hit that 45 mark as well. But Emma, while I have you with a couple of questions here too,
Yeah.
you have been hiring and you do have some open roles. Could you talk
Yeah.
about what you're looking for in the market right now? And let's give a shout out for that, whether people are on the line or whether they know somebody who might be interested. It'd be great to broadcast those.
Yeah, so we have 5 verticals within our People Insights team. I think I saw this question earlier as well. So we have a partnerships team which is, most similar to sort of that consultant model of working very closely both with our people, COEs, and forming that people strategy, or helping inform that people strategy, as well as consultants that are working directly with our line of business. We have a people data science team, we have a people research team, and then we have the concept of sort of analytics at scale, which is really enabling sort of self-service and that really robust data and measurement machine. And we have roles open on all of those teams. So we have partnerships roles that are open, data science, people research, as well as in that analytics at scale. So more of the data focus or the BI engineer focus as well. What I would say we are looking for is people who are a decent human being. So it's really important to me that I work with good people who prioritize the needs of the team, who want to make sure that we're doing the best thing for the company and not just for ourselves. So that's what I mean by a decent human being. And then having a really good attitude, because you can teach skills and capabilities, but having that attitude, having that outlook, persevering through difficult projects, always sort of raising the bar on yourself, that I think is what I look for, irrespective of role or level.
That's great to hear. And so you said there's 5 pillars within the team?
Yeah, so there's two sub teams within partnerships. We have one team dedicated to really guiding that people strategy, and then we have a business insights team that's working more directly with our lines of business.
That's super helpful. And could you differentiate between data science and research?
Yeah, so I think really depending on what the structure of a people analytics team is. I've seen this role separate. I've also seen it combined. But people data science is probably like a more traditional data science role. A lot of metric definition, sort of different ML models you might be training or building, regression analysis, statistical significance, all of that wonderful work. Probably more similar to sort of like a product data science role, but for the people space. And then our research team are really our wonderful behavioral scientists. So almost all of them, I think all of them have PhDs in IO psychology and that background. So that really deep expertise in human behavior.
That's super helpful and really exciting that you're hiring across the board. Is there anything you could share in terms of how you've gotten the investment to go after that? Whether that's like tips and tricks generally for other people that are maybe trying to pursue a larger team or go after more work within the company, or things that have actually come out of the Atlassian experience. If there's anything you share with people on the line about how do you get investment to go after these things?
Yeah, so I only laugh, Richard, because my tip or trick is to try and keep your team as small as possible and then be really sort of over orient on competence. And then I've found my team being built and invested in spite of myself, where I'm like, no, I really want to keep this small. Which is only going to work in companies where you're growing. Like, I don't think that that strategy is going to translate broadly, nor do I think it's like particularly unique to me. But I'm sort of the opinion that I'd rather have sort of that small and mighty team. Um, but also I am surrounded by executives that see the value in the work that we do. So I'm really not having to sort of like fight that good fight of like, here's how I can support you. And so I think that's really a very fortunate situation that I've walked into, which is why I'm getting the investment that we're getting.
I think that's incredible. That's a very mature perspective too for teams to think about that it's not about like who has the biggest team or the most people or the most things. It's like do what you've been told to do really, really well,
Yeah.
and success follows from there and kind of building up from there and seeing the wisdom you bring with that is tremendous.
Thank you.
Uh, it looks like kind of just thinking about the chat there. There are a couple other questions about like workforce planning and AI related projects. Could you talk about how your team's involved in kind of either one of those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I'm probably proudest of in our work at Atlassian is that we partner really closely with the Team Anywhere Teamwork Lab, who have put out some wonderful research on the sort of the adoption and the state of AI in the workplace. I really would encourage you to follow Molly on Molly Sands on LinkedIn and read that report. Similarly, we're doing similar studies, but inside of the organization. So, what does adoption of AI look like? How much time savings are people finding? Where are those sort of bright spots? Thank you, Richard. That was so quick. Where are those bright spots? So there's a couple different lenses that we're putting on this, one of which is what are the opportunities that we see within the HR team to bring AI into the workplace. Obviously, working at Atlassian, we have a wonderful product suite available to us as well in the form of Rovo. And so we're really looking at it from a multitude of perspectives, which I think is really fun.
That's helpful. Maybe a kind of broad question for you, because one of the debates that comes up is as AI projects come to HR teams, sometimes the people analytics people being the kind of like the nerdy interested people become the owners of AI suddenly and maybe without the investment or the kind of resources that follow along with it. Could you talk about your perspective or philosophy around how does AI differ from analytics or how do they complement or it's a very broad question, but love your thoughts on
Yeah.
this.
Look, I think in certain organizational contexts, it would absolutely make sense to put AI inside of a people analytics team, especially if that's sort of the most technical team within, a specific part of the organization. I think for me at Atlassian, I work at a company that is, 75% of which is engineering resources. And so I don't think that we're the right people to own it within our company, but we are very interested in the adoption of AI and how AI is going to change people's roles as that adoption increases over time. And what does that mean for our workforce in the future of our company? And then what does that mean for our customers and the future of their workforce and how work might get done in the future? And so I think the idea that I can follow that thread all the way through to not just how is this going to impact Atlassian, but into how is this going to impact a number of organizations around the globe. I think that's what's sort of fascinating me most about this.
That's helpful. And I think that's incredibly healthy to have AI have its own investment and support systems. Because honestly, I've seen it kind of steamroll some analytics projects or analytics teams that had great agendas, great decisions they want to support, and then suddenly they get tasked with automating HR through AI.
Yeah.
It's not quite the same thing. It's something a little bit different there, and it's maybe more ops or maybe more tech or maybe less. And I just being the new kid on the block still in people analytics, it's been funny seeing this new function kind of emerge, or this new area emerge, and maybe
Yeah.
we're a little less shiny than we used to be, but that's
Yeah.
okay maybe. So I just grappling with
Yeah.
that as that changes, and it's helpful to hear how your perspective has been changing and shifting on that too.
Yeah.
So let's bring it back to new hires. Let's say a handful of people on this call all get hired at Atlassian. They're doing great. They come on board. At the end of their first year, like what was it that made them successful? Or what is it that makes somebody successful at Atlassian, especially within the people analytics context?
Um, I'll preface this by saying that I think I'm only 5 months in, and so I might
Yeah,
not be the
it could
best.
be a fair guess, or maybe
Yeah,
what's top
I
of mind
might
for
not be
you
the
is you.
yeah, I might not be the authority yet on this topic.
Yeah,
But for me, I think it's three things. One is prioritization. I think in sort of a mid-sized company, especially having come from a big company, I look around and all I see is a world of opportunities, like all of the things that can be improved over time. And so really um, having good internal diligence on like, no, this is the most impactful thing that I could be doing right now. On prioritization is going to make you more successful. Um, I, this is my own personal bias, but I think that no matter how good your science is, unless you have those key relationships across the organization, you're not going to have the same impact that you would have with those relationships. And so I think relationships is really critical. Just sort of having having that impact spread across the organization as broadly as you can. And then look, it's a little bit cliched, but I think it's really important that people um, move past the very, sort of normal, sort of experience that everyone goes through, where they go through a little bit of imposter syndrome and get comfortable with bringing like their strengths to the team. Like that strength, that's probably the reason that you got hired, is that they wanted you to have that. They don't expect you to be the same as every other person that is on the team. And so, bringing your full self professionally to work, I think is what's going to make you successful.
love that. That's super helpful. As you think about your team, and again, kind of in the context of being new, and this could also be of previous teams too, if you wanted to open it up a little bit broader. I would love to get you to brag a little bit about something, whether it's an accomplishment of your team or something you're proud of. And I know people analytics people like to talk about our challenges. We like to stay focused there, but you've done some really phenomenal work, and you've helped enable some phenomenal work. Is there something you'd like to share or brag about that you've gotten to work on?
Um, oh, I'm terrible at bragging. I can only answer this question if I reframe it as like, what was the most fun that I was having at work?
Perfect. I would love that.
So I owe a great deal of debt and gratitude to Miranda Kalinowski and Ruta Singh at Meta for letting me run amok. They gave me more influence than any analytics professional has any right to have. Miranda herself used to say, who was the head of global recruiting, used to say that I set the recruiting strategy, which was not true, by the way. But they really let me reorient them on outcomes. And so it was a very data-driven recruiting strategy. And recruiting data is both the wild, wild west, and there's more data than you really ever would need in life. And so it's the most fun that I've ever had is trying to grow a company at that scale as quickly as we did and using data to literally, we would write this recruiting strategy. We would send it to the senior most executives at the company, which was a small group. And then every quarter, we would give ourselves like a report card on how we were doing against this strategy, all of which was data informed, data supported, data driven. And I don't think I've ever had more fun at work, which might be sad.
No, I think that's tremendous. And having been at Meta for a little bit when you were there too, I can second that. Just the tremendous work that team did and that you did while you were there to build a unbelievable operation.
Yeah,
So
yeah, it
congrats on
definitely
that.
was not just me. But it was without the the graciousness of those leaders letting us come in and sort of do that work, we never would have had as much fun or had as much impact.
That's awesome. Thank you, Emma. Okay, let's talk about looking forward a little bit, and I'm watching the clock here a little to make sure we can save a ton of time for Q&A and questions from everybody on the call. As you think about trends and challenges broadly, so taking a step back from Atlassian, looking at the people analytics space as a whole, what's top of mind for you as you're thinking about how this field has been shifting and changing, and what's next for the field?
I think this may end up being a very non-traditional answer. I have two things that are sort of top of mind for me that I am still sort of turning over. I don't know that I've reached a conclusion or have a set sort of outcome that I think is going to sort of come to fruition yet. I'm finding, and it might just be a product of the environments I find myself working in, but I'm really finding the intersection of the way that product analytics teams are run at tech organizations and the way that people analytics teams are run at tech organizations are going to have some really interesting inflection points in the future. I think there's a lot that those two teams can learn from each other. And certainly, I've been as influenced by the product analytics sort of leaders and organizations at the companies that I've worked at as I have been with other people analytics leaders. So that's one, which I know sounds very vague, but if you go down a rabbit hole on those two things, there's something there. I don't know what it is yet, but there's something there.
And just to be clear, you see them converging towards each other or actually moving away from each other in terms of how they're managed and operate?
I think that the way that they approach problems are going to come together. I still think that product analytics organizations are going to get to do way more experimentation and statistical analysis just based on the problem set that they're solving. That's just bread and butter of a product analytics organization, and people analytics organizations generally tend to try to find those experiment opportunities. So it's just the nature of the work will still be different, but I do think that bringing more of a product analytics framework to the people space, I do see something in that. And I think
Is there something that
bringing those
you've
worlds closer.
stolen or brought over already? Like, what's a piece we can make tangible for the audience around, like how? Because some people on the call might not know kind of how product analytics teams work. Is there something that you find very like noteworthy? You're like, hey, I'm going to steal that and bring that over.
Yeah, so I think it's and I think this is, I will just also call out, I think this is somewhat my inform/data engineering bias as well. But product analytics organizations and product analytics organizations in general tend to start with the outcome that they're trying to drive, and then they create a KPI tree around the measurement of those, the outcome that they're trying to drive towards, their North Star metric that they have associated with that. They have a counter metric of the behavior they don't want to incentivize through increasing the outcome. And then they have a number of direct and indirect levers, and then they also fold in their goals, and and that sort of forms the basis of the measures that they're going to track and all of those wonderful things, and it goes into research design and everything else. But that practice of setting that up front and then remaining just solely committed to seeing that outcome through, whether it works or it fails, and everything about execution of that initiative or project is centered on understanding, if that solution drives the outcome that they're looking for. And a lot of business process support teams don't operate that way. That's not the way that they're used to framing things. That's not the way that they try to apply analytics. And so I really think that sort of stealing that framework and applying it, there's something there. And conversely, I also think there's really something about the way that people analytics centers human behavior, that product analytics, I think, will start adopting as well. So, yeah, that's something that I continue to just kind of mull over, that I think that there's something there. I don't know exactly what the outcome is yet, but that's what's keeping me up at night.
Oh, I love it. And I know people in the chat, they do. We were getting some kind of feedback and comments and emojis throughout. And just thank you for letting me press you on that, because that was
Yeah,
a
of course.
really phenomenal insight there around kind of that creating KPI trees about where you want to go, and not just what has happened. And
Yes.
it's a great framing. So thank you for that. So for this part of the show, let's end with some advice for early career professionals. We might have some people watching these that want to break into people analytics, or they think about getting into people analytics, or they'd like to move from another function over. What advice would you give to people analytics professionals who are early in their careers?
Um, okay, I have two things. One is I don't think that you can have more fun than in the people analytics space. I think it's so endlessly fascinating. Um, I've been in this space for something like 20 years, and it continues to sort of change and evolve. And I'm just as curious about it as I was 20 years ago. Um, and the second piece of advice that I have, I'm actually going to steal from uh, Laurie Gola, who was this chief people officer when you and I were at Meta, or Facebook. She had said in a talk that she really thought of her career more as a jungle gym versus a ladder. So really just kind of going where her interests were, and the results sort of followed. Obviously, she's a very successful person, and clearly did quite well for herself. Um, but I really liked that. I really like the idea that you sort of follow where that sort of natural curiosity and passion is. And then doing that very well, like the results sort of follow, versus having like a very intentional sort of career ladder that you're sort of trying to linearly sort of climb up.
I think that's fantastic advice. Emma, from everybody on the call, from everybody watching this later, a huge thank you. Thank you for being open, for sharing, for continuing to hire and invest in the people analytics space. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah,
And with
thank you
that, we
so
will
much for
close
having me.
out the recorded version of this.